If you're a landlord looking to rent out your property without a realtor, you're in the right place. So whether you're trying to cut the costs or stay in control of the process, or just you want to learn how to do it yourself, this video will give you everything you need step by step. In this video, we'll discuss the steps to renting out your home and how to protect yourself from bad tenants and stay away from scammers that could cost you thousands of dollars. And then we'll talk about your rights and also how to find the best candidates for your properties. I'll break it down. First, I'll cover the following topics in the same order, and then we will leave the timestamp underneath this video so you can go watch each topic later on if you need to. The topics that I'm gonna cover is as following. First is how to price your rental property correctly to attract the right tenants. The second one is the best platforms to list your property and get maximum exposure. The third one is how to screen tenants thoroughly to avoid costly mistakes. And in my opinion, this is the most important step. The fourth one is key legal considerations to protect yourself as a landlord. The next one would be how to write up a lease contract. And the last one is how to handle lease agreement, deposits, and the monthly payments. Now you may ask, who am I to talk about these topics? For those of you who don't know me, I'm a Toronto real estate agent working with sellers, buyers, and landlords for the past 9 years. You may have also seen me on global news discussing the real estate topics. And just so you have an idea of the type of landlords we service, you can see my listings on Realtor. Let's take a look at the rentals only. They're ranging from $2,100 to $10,000 per month. So you know I've been on every side of the business, which means I know exactly what issues landlords face when it comes to renting their property. And I'm going to help you use that knowledge to your advantage. This video guide is different because it's practical. I'm not here to sell you on a hype or buzzwords. I'm here to share real, actionable information based on the actual and real world experience. Most of the information in this video is from my book, Original Asset, which you don't need to buy at all because this video is gonna cover that information. Since the information in this video may be overwhelming, if at any part of the video you feel you have questions on any of these information, use the link down below to book a discovery call with me or my team. And in order to help us provide you with more content like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Let's get started. First, let's see how to price your rental property correctly to attract the right tenants. You might already know pricing your rental too high means it sits empty for weeks or maybe months. That will cost you money. Pricing it too low also means that you leave money on the table. So how do you find the sweet spot? Basically, you need a price that attracts high quality tenants while maximizing your rental income. Of course, pricing is important because tenants are constantly checking rental prices in your area. Let's say, for example, the different websites, different platforms. So the tenants that are looking to rent a place in a specific area, they already know and probably, I don't want to say more educated than you, but they have probably seen lots of comparables online or probably they have seen them in person. So if your rent isn't competitive, they will move on to the next listing. So it's pretty easy how to research rental prices. Check listings on the real estate websites or rentals or realtor.ca, stuff like that. I'm going to tell you a list of platforms in the next section that you can do a little bit of research on your own to see what similar properties are going for in your neighborhood. The rest is easy. Compare the size, location, amenities, and condition to your own unit. Look at how long the listings stay active. So for example, if similar listings sit on the market for weeks or months, of course their prices are too high for their condition. The second one is you need to factor in the location and demand. So why does it matter? So for example, a 2-bedroom in downtown Toronto will have a very different price than a 2-bedroom in a suburban area, because in downtown Toronto there's a higher demand for 2-bedroom, 2-washroom units because normally 2 partners or let's say 2 roommates rent a place together. But in a suburban area or let's say outskirts of Toronto, a 2-bedroom probably is being rented by a family or a younger couple. So, and there's a different demand for each type of property in different areas basically. Just so you know, these are the factors that normally affect the rental demand. The first one is the most important one, which is proximity to transit and major employers. So rentals near subways, bus lines, or office hubs, let's say downtown Toronto, usually command higher rents. And also we have seasonal demand in Toronto as well. Again, I'm talking about Toronto, but you can generalize this video to anywhere else in Canada. So in Toronto, we have busier season, we have a slower season. For example, summer months, May to August, are normally peak rental season when it gets to rental market. And peak rental season means more demand for rental properties, and that means higher prices. Winter month, on the other hand, let's say November till February, typically see lower demand, meaning that renters can negotiate on the prices, properties sitting on the market for a while. Okay, so now let's talk about setting a competitive price. Most tenants expect to negotiate if the market is slow. For example, in this winter months, the market is slower, so most tenants expect to negotiate. So pricing your unit slightly higher than your ideal rent can give you some room to adjust. However, if it's too high, they don't even bother trying. So you need to find that sweet spot. So in order to price your unit strategically, you need to test the market and adjust it if needed. I can tell you the first 5 to 7, 8 days, let's say the first week of your listing will tell you if your price is right or not by the amount of showings and inquiries that you get. So now I'm going to tell you how to gauge tenant interest. So if you get lots of inquiries but no application, means that price is probably fair, but the tenants may have concerns about the unit itself. For example, the condition of the unit. If you get few inquiries, meaning that your price is too high, you need to drop it a little bit to adjust the listing price similar to other comparable units in the market in order to bring the tenants to your doorsteps. And if you get multiple offers, you may have underpriced the unit. If this happens quickly, you might be able to raise the prices slightly. Now that you found out what's the sweet spot for your unit in terms of prices, let's talk about the next step, where and how to list your rental property to get the best tenants quickly. Let's talk about the best platforms to list your property and get maximum exposure. Once you've set the right price for the rental, the next step is getting it in front of the right tenants. Not all rental platforms are equal. Some attract better tenants, some are flooded with scammers, and others barely get the traffic. So let's break it down to see what's the best places to list your property and how to maximize your exposure. So top rental listing websites. Let's start with the best one and the most visited website, realtor.ca. Realtor.ca is the highest visited place for tenants in Canada, but that's the network that realtors use. So in order to use that network, you need to work with a real estate agent. So what is the next best option? There are a few options such as rentals.ca, Zompair or Padmapper, also Facebook Marketplace and basically local rentals group. Regarding Facebook Marketplace is a great place to get tenant leads, but it certainly requires some filtering. So when you list your properties on those websites, you need to watch for scammers who are pretending to be tenants. You need to watch for people asking for personal information too early. You need to watch for low quality leads, because it happened a lot of times that some people will contact you to inquire about the property without reading the full listing description. So meaning that after talking to you, they say, oh no, it doesn't work for me. Whereas they could have read the listing description and they didn't need even to call you or bother you. One pro tip I can tell you if you're using Facebook or rental groups is that try to post at the peak times. Peak times are for rental searches for the tenants are usually evenings and weekends. That's the time that most of the tenants are active looking online. The next set of websites that I would like to mention, because we used to use them a lot like 8-9 years ago or 10 years ago, are Kijiji and Craigslist. You can still use them, but you need to be cautious because of the type of people or type of the leads that you get through those websites. You need to filter those inquiries that you get rigorously. I don't know if they're still worth using or not. I haven't used them for a long time, but they were a good spot to find tenants back at the time, let's say 8, 9 or 10 years ago. Of course, these websites also come with a little bit of risk. They usually have a higher volume of scam listing and fake inquiries. Also, not many qualified tenant leads. One important tip that I can give you about this website is that if you're using these platforms, watermark your photos to prevent the scammers from copying your listing. I've heard about the listings that, for example, a scammer steals the property photos from a different listing and posts it for another property and try to fish poor tenants to send them that person, let's say, for example, deposit or money or fees and stuff like that. So if you're using those unregulated websites, you need to be extra cautious about all these possible outcomes. If you're using, for example, MLS or realtor.ca, that's a different story. They're less to be worried about. But if you're using these types of websites, you need to be cautious about the content that you're posting online. So the last group of websites that I would like to mention are the websites for specific tenant groups. So for example, if you're planning to rent out your property, for example, your property is next to a university, you plan to rent it to the students, you might also as well try places for students or try to contact the university. They may allow you to post your listings. You need to talk to them. If you're planning to do a short-term rental out of your property, you can contact Airbnb or Vrbo, services like that. So regardless of the platform that you're using, you need to make sure to maximize exposure on any platform that you're posting your listings at. So once you pick up the right platform, follow these strategies to get the most views and attract the most quality tenants. First of all, use high quality photos. Listings with bright, well-lit photos get maybe double more inquiries. And second thing is that you need to write a clear and compelling listing description, including prices, size, location, and the key amenities that you're offering in your property. The next one is you need to post at the peak time. As I mentioned earlier in this video, the listings get the most attention in the evening between 5 to 9 p.m. about that time and on the weekends. And the next one is you need to boost your listing if needed. For example, if you're on rentals.ca or Kijiji and Facebook, paid promotions can help if your ad isn't getting views. So basically, those websites, they offer you free posting, but in order to boost you up, they charge you money. So at the end of the day, you're still paying. The last important thing you need to remember, you need to respond quickly because the best tenants move fast. So you don't want to let those inquiries sit for too long in your inbox. Now that your listing is live, let's talk about the next step, how to screen tenants properly so you don't end up with problems down the road. So how to screen tenants thoroughly to avoid costly mistakes. So as I mentioned it earlier, this step in my opinion is the most important step. A bad tenant can cost you thousands of dollars in unpaid rent, property damage, and legal headaches. But the thorough screening process can help you avoid 90% or more of the rental problems before they even start. So here's how to properly vet tenants and ensure you're choosing the right tenant. Number one is that you need to ask them for a detailed rental application. So why is it important? A well-structured rental application helps weeding out unqualified tenants right away. Before telling you what to ask for in a rental application, I'm going to take you to the screen and we are going to take a look at the rental application form that I personally use to get the information from the tenants. So this is the rental application that I use. As you can see, it starts with the address, prices, dates, and personal information from the tenants, prior employment, last 2 places of residence. I'm going to tell you why that's important later on, if they have any obligations or anything. And at the end, they're going to sign this rental application. I'm going to use that rental application in order to pull the credit. So as you saw in that form, things that you need to ask for in an application, like usually full contact information, names, addresses, current and previous addresses, and employment details, companies, position, salary, and employment contact information, monthly income, or some sort of employment income information. And in my opinion, it's ideally needs to be 3 times the rent. So for example, if your rent is, let's say, $2,000, the income, the monthly income should be around $6,000 in order for the tenant to be able to comfortably cover that rent. Of course, that 3 times rule is ideal, but I've seen some landlords settle with, let's say, 2 or 2.5 times the rent income. Some landlords wanted more. So it totally depends on you. Another thing that you need to ask for is references. For example, personal references, previous landlords, contact information that you can reach out to and talk to them about the tenants that you are looking at. The last one that's super important in a rental application is the consent for a credit and background check. So right away, I can tell you there are some red flags that when you see them, you need to be more careful. First red flag is incomplete application or refusal to provide any key details. The second red flag is rushing to move in without paperwork. And the third red flag is fake or unverified references. In my opinion, a serious tenant won't hesitate to fill out a full rental application. So be wary of anyone who resists providing details to you. Now let's go to the verifying income and employment. Why it matters? You need to confirm that your tenant earns enough to comfortably afford their rent. So how to verify the income? Ask for proof of employment and see what they send you. Tell them the more that you send is gonna help more towards your application. For self-employed tenants, you can request the proof that they got paid or tell them, hey, can I see your notice of assessment, stuff like that. And also call the employer to confirm their position and salary. One important thing that I always do, I don't rely on the number that's listed on the rental application. When I see an employer name and I know them, or if I don't know them, I Google them, search for the number online and make sure that number matches this number on the rental application. And I try to call the number that's online to make sure if that person actually works in that company. So these are the extra steps that you can go to verify more information. So let's talk about red flags. Red flags including inconsistent income or unverifiable job history. Another red flag could be a new job with no proof of employment, or another one could be fake employment contracts. So as I said, one way to verify that is verifying phone numbers through the company websites. So about the income, while we are at it, if the income is a little bit lower than what you're expecting, but you like the tenant, you can ask them for a co-signer or guarantor if they are willing to put a co-signer or guarantor on the lease agreement. Okay, the next one is running a credit check. In my opinion, you shouldn't skip this one. My office runs credit checks for me, and I do it for every application that I receive. Since we are connected to Equifax, I have access to the most recent score and report. A credit report basically reveals or shows you the financial responsibility and any history of unpaid debt or evictions. So now I'm gonna tell you what to look for in a credit report when you see a rental application. First is the credit score. Scores of 650 or 700 and above are considered good, but the score itself is not important when it comes to credit applications. You need to check the history to make sure there is no history of late payments or collections or bankruptcies. What I would also like to see is that low debt to income ratio. So red flags when it comes to credit check are first, frequent late payments or recent large debts. The second red flag that comes to my mind is a history of collections. The third red flag that comes to mind is a tenant refusing to provide consent for a credit check. That's a huge one. I can understand what they don't want a credit check, but if I'm a landlord or if I'm representing a landlord, I want to make sure that the tenant that I'm taking on is credit worthy. And in terms of credit check application, I prefer to use Equifax. Not only because my office here is connected to Equifax and we can pull the report, but also because it's easy to read and understand. So the next step for background check is you need to contact the previous landlords. And in my opinion, you need to contact the 2 previous landlords. A past landlord's feedback is one of the best ways to predict the future behavior. So when you call someone's past landlord, these are the questions that you need to ask. First is that, did they pay the rent on time? That's the most important question. The second question that you need to ask is that, did they take care of the property? The next question is that, did they follow the lease rules? Next question would be, would you rent to them again? And after getting the answer to these 4 questions, I'm sure you're gonna have a more clear understanding of the type of tenant that you're gonna deal with. Oh, one important thing before I forget, always check the owner with landlord name. I personally have access to land registry. One of the things that I do is that I cross-check the name of the owner of that property with the name of landlord that the tenant is giving me on that rental application. I don't want to see any discrepancies, so always cross-check to make sure that person that you're calling, that name is on the land registry as the owner of the property that the tenant used to live, because otherwise the landlord could be a friend pretending to be a reference. All right, and the last one is that always trust your gut. Even if a tenant looks great on paper, always trust your gut. And I suggest that you need to look for warning signs during the viewings or showings and communication. So for example, if they are rushing to move in without proper screening or proper paperwork or not, if they're rushing to move in quickly without proper screening, that's a red flag to me. Do they seem, let's say, desperate or overly eager? Are they avoiding questions or they're reluctant to provide information? So these are the things that you need to consider before accepting a rental application. In my opinion, a reliable tenant will be transparent, cooperative, and organized. If someone feels off, there's probably a reason for it. So final thoughts. A solid screening process saves you time, money, and stress in the long run. So I suggest always verify every information that they give you. Of course, you can't verify everything, but verify as much as possible. Now that you found the right tenant, let's talk about the next steps. In this section, I'm gonna talk about the key legal considerations to protect yourself as a landlord. First of all, you need to use a legally compliant lease agreement. The lease agreement is your #1 legal protection. So as a landlord, if your lease agreement is incomplete or vague or missing key clauses, you could end up in disputes with no legal ground to stand on. I'm gonna go through a lease agreement, an Ontario standard lease, later in this video, in the next section actually. So I'm not gonna tell you in details what you need to put in a lease agreement. So we're gonna hold it for now. And the next thing that you need to understand is fair housing laws. So meaning that you need to have no discriminations. Or pay attention to this. You cannot reject a tenant based on race, gender, disability, religion, family status, or age. So legally acceptable reasons to reject a tenant are normally insufficient income. For example, the rent is high for that income, or bad credit history, or negative references from the past landlords, or failure to provide actually required information. So these are the normal legally acceptable reasons to reject a tenant. And another thing that you cannot do is that you cannot ask about the tenant's personal background. For example, about the tenant's race, religion, or stuff like that, or age stuff. Of course, age you might be able to find out because in the rental application there's the date of birth. So other than that, yeah, you cannot ask them directly about race, religion, and stuff like that. So, and also you cannot reject the tenant just because they have children. So be careful. And same also applies to a pet. Another thing is that you need to be careful is that you cannot charge different rents based on the tenant's gender, nationality, or age. So pro tip is that stick to financial and rental history criteria when screening the tenants to stay compliant with fair housing laws. Another thing is that you need to stay on top of rental increases. Rent increases are heavily regulated in many provinces and cities, and violating those rules can lead to fines or even lawsuits. So if the rent control applies, check your region's maximum allowable rent increase before making any changes. For example, in Ontario, every 12 months you can have one rent increase. Another thing that landlords need to know is that they need to maintain their property. So landlords are legally required to maintain a safe and livable property. So your legal maintenance responsibilities including providing essential services, for example, heat, electricity, plumbing, and hot water. Another thing is that fixing major repairs. So for example, if the roof leaks, or let's say if the furnace breaks down, you need to fix those issues. And on top of that, you need to ensure safety compliance. For example, your smoke detectors should be in working condition. That's just an example. So final thoughts. You need to protect yourself by knowing the law. The best way to avoid legal issues as a landlord is stay informed and following the rules. Now that you know how to protect yourself legally, let's move on to the next step, how to fill out and write the lease agreement. So let's take a look at the standard residential tenancies agreement. This form or this lease is mandatory in the province of Ontario. I'm going to go through that form quickly with you so you know what to do and what to write and how to fill up this form. So first of all, up there is a landlord's legal name. You go down tenants, last name, first name. You go down, there's a property. If it's a basement unit, you just write down basement here, or if unit 1011, 1012 or whatever, you write it down, the address. Go down and number of parking spaces. You write down if there's a parking. If the unit is in a condo building, you check here as yes. Address for notices given to the landlord. So you can put your address here, and also down there's a line that says both the landlord and tenant agree to receive notices, blah blah. You can read the rest. You check yes here, and then you write down your email address and the tenant's email address here. Underneath that, you put your contact information if anything happens to the property or in the property, so they can reach you out at the phone number or email address. The tenancy starts. Okay, first of all, this is a part that sometimes the landlords mistake. So first of all, this is a fixed length time. It's a fixed length tenancy. Usually you sign the lease for 12 months or 1 year. For example, if the lease starts at 1st of February 2025, this is the start date, and the end date would be 31st of January 2026. So from 1st of February 2025 till 31st of January 2026. So that's 12 month or 1 year lease tenancy. And as you can see, after the term ends, the tenancy goes to a month-to-month tenancy. You can go down and read all those information. Here you write down the rent, which is, for example, your amount, the rent amount, and when the rent is due. So for example, if you rent out your unit mid-month, let's say for example 15th of February, you write down 15th of every month you want to get rent to be paid. So it's first, third, second, whatever you agree on, and then you check here in this box as month. It says that the tenant will pay the following rent. You fill out here, and the total should be the total amount that you're charging the tenant. So if, for example, if you're charging the tenant separate for the parking, for example, $100, $200 or whatever, you write it down, and your base rent is here, for example, $2,000 or whatever. Then you fill up and add the numbers, put the full total rent here. This section, rent is payable to, you write down the name of the landlord, which is basically you. Then it says that the rent will be paid using the following method. First of all, many landlords would prefer to get postage checks. So this is something that you need to consider, that postage checks are not mandatory, it's optional. So basically the landlord and tenant can agree to pay using postage checks or e-transfer. My point is that you can agree on the type, on the basically the way that you're getting paid, but you cannot force it to the tenant that, hey, you have to give me postage checks. You cannot do that. Then you go down, if there's partial rent, you most probably are not going to use that part, so I'm not going to go through that. If the tenant check is bounced, so for the bounce check, it says that it cannot be more than $20, so you just write down $20. That's easy. The services you're providing is their gas provided, air conditioning, on-site laundry, or for example, if you have a coin laundry, it's pay per use. So you check this box. Then basically anything that you provide, you can check yes here. Then you go to the next section. This section is about utilities. If you're providing electricity, heat, water, or if the tenant is responsible for paying on like hydro, heat, or water, you check the proper boxes here. So then you go to rent discount. Like 99% of the times you don't need anything to do with this, but you just check this box. There's no rent discount, but yeah, there are instances that there might be some discounts, which because those are exceptions, I'm not going to go through that in this video. So rent deposit. One more thing about rent deposit. For the deposit, you cannot ask the tenants, at least in province of Ontario. In Quebec or BC, there are different rules. In the province of Ontario, you cannot ask for damage deposits. Whatever deposit it is there, it's written there. It has to be equal to the last month rent. So even though when we charge the tenants for a deposit in real estate contract, we usually get first and last. We usually get bank draft for first and last. For example, for a $2,000 rental property, we get a $4,000 bank draft for first and last month. But even though you get a $4,000 bank draft, because first $2,000 goes towards the first month rent payment, you just put the $2,000 here. So my point is that you cannot put anything more than the last month rent in this section. So just remember that. Let's go to the next one. Key deposit. If there's a key deposit, yes, of course, there has to be a key deposit. Again, you can basically agree not to get a key deposit, but I don't recommend that. However, for the key deposit, remember, key deposit cannot exceed replacement cost of the keys. So, or at least somewhere around that number. You cannot, for example, if just one copy of the key, no fob, no nothing, you cannot charge them, let's say $200 for just one single key that you can go and copy that for, let's say, for example, $20. I'm just saying. But if the fob and the key and the garage remote is like $300 in total, you write down $300 here. It depends how much is the replacement cost of your keys. Then it goes there, no smoking. Most of the people says that there are no smoking allowed inside the premises. So you check that box. A liability insurance. So ask the tenants to get a liability insurance that covers their liabilities and contents. So you go down to the next section. This section, I always check this section because the way that I draft my contracts, I have my own clauses, and the landlords that I'm working with, they have specific needs. They want to make sure those needs are seen in the contract. So I have my own clauses that I'm attaching. I'm going to ask the tenants to sign an initial under those pages, under those clauses, and then I'm going to attach those clauses, those extra clauses as an additional schedule to this lease. So I always check this place. But if you don't have any clauses and you're okay with this lease agreement, you can leave it unchecked. But I personally prefer to have my sets of clauses because they cover a lot of stuff that can prevent future dilemma or future conflicts. And then the next page is the signature page, your name, signature, tenant's name, signature, and the rest of this lease is basically some educational content. You can go through them. It covers some of the laws and regulations around the tenancy in Ontario. So this was it about the lease contract. So let's go to the last section, how to handle the deposit and multi-payment. So in my contract and my practice, we write down that the tenant has to submit the deposit within 24 hours from the acceptance of the lease. Then within that time period, the tenant has to give us the deposit, usually in the form of a bank draft or direct deposit. We will basically hold that deposit in our brokerage's trust account, and we are going to issue a receipt to the tenant. So in that case, before our landlord clients give out the keys to the tenant, we make sure that deposit check goes through and sits in our trust account. About the monthly payments, as I mentioned earlier, you cannot force the tenant to give you a postage checks or give you like pre-authorized deposit. So what you can do is that you can agree to give you postage checks, or let's say, for example, do e-transfer. But whatever the method of payment, it has to be agreed upon. And again, you cannot charge security deposit in the province of Ontario. Just remember that. Or for example, if a check bounces back, you cannot ask for more than $20 as a penalty. And about the rental increases, as I mentioned earlier, the rental increase, at least in the province of Ontario, is 90 days notice. So if you're planning to increase the rent, if your property has been built before November 2018, you have to go by the government guidelines and you have to give proper notice, which is 90 days notice in advance if you want to increase the rent for the next term. Oh, and one more thing, you can only increase the rent once every 12 months. So basically once a year. And one of the last things that I can suggest the landlord, always keep proper records for your legal protection. Having organized rental records protects you in the case of disputes or audits or legal claims. At the end, if you choose to not use the services of a real estate agent to rent your property, make sure you follow the steps above. But if you choose to use the services of a real estate agent, I can tell you that you don't need to worry about most of what I just said, as a real estate agent will do most of the above for you, from pricing to advertisement and marketing your property to handling the tenant screening and paperwork and also handling the deposit, etc.